Hello, I'm Caden Wade, and today I'm proud to present to you my research on Lake Victoria and the devastation that climate change has had on its inland fisheries. As a brief outline, I'm going to be looking at three main parts, first being the Lake Victoria Basin and its geography, then the intensive fishing and climate change that has gone on in the area, and then third, the responses and reactions of both fish and people. For the past academic year, me and some other researchers have been looking into how climate change affects large inland fisheries, mostly in freshwater environments. Lake Victoria stood out to me the most. It is heavily employed by fishers. It is the second largest freshwater lake in the world, right under Lake Superior, and then the largest freshwater lake in Africa. It is home to many diverse species of fish, including cichlids and tilapia, as well as carps and minnows, and now the invasive Nile perch. It encompasses Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania on its shorelines, and then the entire lake basin also runs into Rwanda and Burundi. Looking at the population, on average, it is about 250 people per square kilometer around the lake, with a total of 40 million people around in each of the three countries. For 22 million of those, over 50% of their animal protein comes from fish. And then 4 million of those rely on fishing for their primary income, either through employment through a large fishery or on their own with their own hand-carved canoes. It is normal that fishing communities are poor and isolated and lack a lot of social or economic safety nets. It is very standard that men fish while women process the catch, care for children, as well as tend to farms or gardens or animals. At the beginning of the presentation, I wanted to focus on just Uganda, but due to these superficial borders placed by colonizers, it is more justified to look at it from a wider view of the lake instead of just one country. Moses Jackson in 2014 said that across the basin, women have as many as 15 children, child and maternal mortality rates are exceedingly high, and fishing communities face a 26% HIV prevalence rate. As I said, colonialism really destroyed the countries in the 1950s. They decided to stock the lake with a bunch of invasive perch, which began to become the most abundant species in there. It wiped out about half of the cichlids in the lake, and the locals were required to rely on that fish as their primary source of income. That industry grew more and more, and then it reached a tipping point to where as more fishers came in, the average fish yield began to drop dramatically. And because of this, economies struggled post-colonization, and people still had to fish as there's not many other sources of income or nutrition anywhere else in these countries. These large cities, like this one pictured here in Tanzania, are largely abandoned, and if not, then they're really run down. Many lack running water and are forced to bathe in the lake, which is sometimes toxic. Water-based diseases because of this bathing are more prevalent, like malaria and mosquitoes requiring foreign and international aid. And on the bottom right, you can see the Nile perch that has been fished up. They are way too big for their environment. While it might be good for catch, it is definitely not good for the biodiversity of the environment. Musangazi said that there is sufficient evidence that fish production in African inland fisheries is more dependent on the external climate drivers than on human exploitation rates and numerous management interventions. Africa is by far the most vulnerable climate to climate change, as it is semi-arid and is largely impoverished, and they produce the least amount of emissions, unlike us here in the States. Lake Victoria experiences these harsh factors in a multitude of ways, from surface water temperature increases to changes in the hydrological cycle, where rainfall is heavier or lighter, extreme weather events where there's longer or bigger floods or drier or longer droughts, and then eutrophication from runoff from farms that are on the coast into the water, feeding into water hyacinth populations as well as algal blooms. As a reaction, these fish tend to migrate towards cooler climates, so they'll actually go deeper into the lake. Because of this, fishermen are going to have to drive and sail farther out to the lake, where it's much harsher with tides and waves. It's longer fishing trips as they don't have motorized vehicles and mostly use oars. And most of the times this is at night, and it's a lot dangerous for these fishermen. And then as these fish grow slowly and more inefficiently in warmer waters, smaller nets are needing to be used. And because of the international aid with malaria, mosquito nets have been added to most fishers' asset classes. They have very small net gauges, so they can catch many fish. And most of the time, 95% of the time, that catch is below the age of maturity. So this also damages spawning stock. And because of the insecticides that are actually on these nets it damages both the consumer and the wildlife. The government hasn't been doing much to help. They've enacted 6-month fishing bans, which actually just destroy people's food security and incomes, and it requires illegal night fishing. So a lot of people get arrested for things that they have no control of as they still need income. And surprisingly, it affects women the most. Even though they're at home, that is the only thing that they have to do. If they don't have any cash to process, they can't go out and open shops like men can. As Murenge said in 2022, alternative sources of nutrition and employment are scarce. So there is little that these fishermen can do aside from fishing. And even when they fish, they're price takers. They have very low bargaining power. For those that did farm their land, which is only about 70%, 41.9% of that experienced lower farm yields due to climate change. And the new stores that men could prop up would close after short times because everybody was feeling the effects of climate change and the lack of fishing yields. Many are forced to leave the Victoria Basin because they don't have the jobs there. 77% struggle to eat without growing crops or caught fish, as well as income from other sources. Mark Weston, a large photographer and intrigue in Lake Victoria climate, is that he said that it's become a bit of a dust bowl because of overgrazing and things like that. So farming has quite difficult as well. There are a lot of possible solutions to this problem. Many suggest investing into NGOs or directly into fishermen objectives, upgrading education as an overall quality of life increase, even adding more regulation to these fishing habitats, making seasons or protected areas, as well as just general education on climate change and these ecosystems and how these fishermen can work with the climate change and with these fish instead of against it. I decided to end on this picture of a fleet of ships leaving out in an early morning in Tanzania. It shows that how many people rely on this in just one small area. These people are going to be out for 8 hours of the day and have no other choice too. So I feel like for us, every little bit that we can do as a large carbon producing nation, whether it be recycling or driving less or taking public transportation, any little bit can help. And these people need it the most as they have no control over it, and the burden all falls on us. These are my references, and I thank you for your time.